If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. Can exercise be destroying your body? In this episode, we discuss an article in Eat This, Not That discusses 7 cardio habits that are destroying your body after 50. What are these habits? Do they apply only to cardio? And why 50? Listen in to learn more.
So it's really interesting. I came across another article from Eat This, Not That, and it says 7 cardio habits that are destroying your body after 50. And I think that's pretty interesting because we talk a lot about resistance training and the importance of strength training. So I kind of wanted to dive into this article a little bit as far as what are these 7 cardio habits that are potentially destroying your body, especially after the age of 50. What do you think about that idea?
Okay, sounds good.
The first thing that they say, or reason number 1, as to why cardio is destroying you after the age of 50, is you're training through the pain and injuries.
Okay, I mean, that's a no-brainer. It says this is a big no-no. Of course it's a big no-no, but there's a fine line between training properly through the pain and further injuring the pain.
Right.
And so the key is if you have an injury, if you have pain, have it assessed and deal with it. I would never encourage somebody not to exercise because they have pain. You want to exercise in a way that is not going to aggravate pain or is going to cause you pain. And that's one of the big issues because so many people will stop exercising because it hurts. Well, exercise is going to hurt a little bit. You got to assess, is it a difference between, as they used to say in my son's youth football, is it an owie or is it an injury? And most of the times, it's just an owie. And if it's something that's persistent, then what are you doing wrong in your training that needs to be corrected? And it could be a matter of your training duration, your training frequency, your shoes that you're wearing when we're talking in terms of cardio. What surfaces are you running on? What kind of exercise are you doing? If you have pain and say it's from running, what other form of exercise can allow you to continue to stimulate adaptation in the cardiorespiratory system without causing that pain?
I also feel like it doesn't just have to be cardio that does that. I mean, resistance training too, you know what I mean? Like if some people, including myself, if they push through whatever pain it is and maybe a joint pops out of place and you're like, nah, I'm fine. I'll suck it up, but you're not. And you should really go get that checked out. I don't think it's limited to only cardio.
Well, of course it's not. And again, you keep pulling up these Eat This, Not That articles, which are, in my opinion, consistently crap, and not totally dissing on the author or the source in general. But in general, yes, it's one of those online magazines that is trying to find as much content as possible. And so they're pulling out every little story that they can. And, probably in 2 weeks, we'll see an article on, the 8 resistance training exercises that are destroying your body after 60. So insert number, insert exercise category, insert age, and you have a new article.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny you mentioned age. I don't think that's just limited to 50. I think even high school kids.
If you're 5 and
Right.
you're getting injured exercising, then yeah, you don't work through the pain, but you figure out how to manage it and how to improve your capacity to train despite having an injury. And if you have an injury, how do you manage the injury? How do you prevent the injury? A lot of this is a common sense, which unfortunately a lot of us don't have when it comes to exercise. Or, we just tend to be afraid to deal with the pain.
Right. If only there was a podcast out there where people could listen to and not be afraid and push through that pain. If only there was a podcast where they could age well.
Well, there's actually a lot of podcasts besides this one that deal effectively with these things. And a lot of it is just know the source that you're going to and go to those reliable sources for information.
Number 2, you're not adding low impact cardio. Basically what they're saying is you're running on pavement, and that can be tough on your joints and on your tendons, especially if you're untrained and have poor technique. But where else are you supposed to run if you're living in a suburban area or a city area? It's not many choices.
Well, I think what they're saying here is you're not supplementing that running with non-weight bearing type of exercise or low impact exercise like stationary cycling or biking, swimming, walking, hiking, those types of activities, which as I read that, I go back to a statement that the father of aerobics made decades ago. And it's sad my students don't even know who Kenneth Cooper is. But Kenneth Cooper said years ago, if you're running for more than 30 minutes a day, you're doing it for more than your health.
Mm.
And so it's not a matter of adding low impact cardio to help your running. I would say rather than saying you're not adding low impact cardio, you're not adding resistance training, because the resistance training is going to help you to absorb those forces of running much more effectively. They're going to give you additional health and performance benefits that you're not getting from just doing cardio. And as we've talked repeatedly on this podcast, when we're just focused on only doing cardio, we're not sustaining the muscle that we have. We're not offsetting some of that sarcopenia that comes with aging. And that's part of the problem why when you get to be over 50, you start having a lot more aches and pains when you're running and doing cardio, is because you haven't managed your muscle tissue very well. And so it's not about adding more and more cardio. It's about doing more effective exercise, and maybe, rather than just running more and more and more, look at how we manage the frequencies and the intensities and the durations of the exercise that we're doing, and maybe running less because we're running harder. Have hard days, easy days, long days, short days, interval days. Manage your training in a more productive manner. Consider periodization when you are putting together your running program. A lot of people just run and run and run. I ran 5 miles in the last couple of weeks, so now I got to start running 6 miles. Maybe you just have to run 4 miles a little bit faster.
Well, that's kind of a good segue for number 3, which is you're training too frequently. And that's really interesting that you said that 30 minutes or more, you're training for more than your health. So are you saying like 30-minute window of cardio is good and ideal for health, but then anything over that, it's essentially you're switching into the realm of just primarily training with a purpose of, man, I don't even know how to ask this question. You're training with a purpose for like marathon running or sprinting, or you're prepping your body for something versus just maintaining that good cardiovascular health.
Yeah, what he's basically saying is that it doesn't take more than 30 minutes of cardio on a daily basis to stimulate the cardiorespiratory system. And so remember, if we're going to improve our VO2 max, we're going to improve it by either increasing our stroke volume max or AVO2 difference max. And longer repetitive cardio is not going to necessarily stimulate those. You've already kind of maxed out on the stimulus. You're now just simply doing it repetitively, which puts a lot more stress on your joints, which is necessary if you're going to be training for a marathon. If you're training for a marathon, you got to get your body used to being able to run 26.2 miles. And so long distance runs are going to be essential. So you're doing that more than 30 minutes for something more than just your health. But, and I often, use my air quote Tabata to talk about how we really don't do Tabata training when we think we're doing Tabata training. But even if you're not perfectly hitting that IE1 protocol that Tabata and coworkers, and I believe it's 1998, established in the research study, you're coming pretty close to it if you're going pretty high intensity for that all-out bout of 20 seconds, 10 seconds rest, repeated for 8 cycles. 4 minutes of cardio. If you extend that a little bit longer, say you do an interval, pretty high intensity interval for 10, 12 minutes, that's going to be enough to stimulate cardiorespiratory response. Tabata showed that you can improve your VO2 max in as little as 4 minutes of very high intensity cardio. So again, if I can do it in 4 minutes, why do I need to be running for more than 30 minutes? Why do I need to be putting that extra stress and load on my joints if I can improve my cardiorespiratory system much more effectively in a shorter duration of time?
Well, I think the answer to that question is prepping your body for the ability to go through that long time frame of stress.
Okay, but again, why do you need to put your body through that long time period of stress?
Well, if you're training for
Right.
a marathon,
If you're training
you're
for a marathon,
specifically
so
training for it.
If you are specifically training for performance, you are doing it for more than your health.
Right.
I often tell my students that one of the biggest frustrations I have in the fitness industry anymore is, among many frustrations, one is that we keep pushing training everybody like an athlete. And what we don't understand is that when athletes train, they are abusing the hell out of their bodies. No athlete is training for their health. They're training for performance. And that training for performance comes with a cost. And it comes with the cost of tearing the crap out of their bodies that you just can't do for the rest of your life. And you look at power lifters, or you look at marathon run, really elite marathon runners. They're not, marathon may be a little bit different, but you're not performing at such a high level forever. I mean, eventually your body is going to have to kind of break down a little bit, or you're going to have to alter your training a little bit. But, if you can run a sub 3-hour marathon, you're a highly competitive marathon runner, you don't have to keep beating your body up as much to keep that performance level up. You just need to maintain your cardio and be able to kind of maintain that ability to run that speed.
Do you think the reason why people and how you said the shift of the health industry is like train like an athlete, do you think that has anything to do with people kind of going the opposite direction of working out for their health and starting to just, I want to work out to look good. I want to be looked at with, man, that guy's aesthetically pleasing. Like, look how in shape he is, versus someone who works out for their health. Yeah, they look decent, but they're not like this athlete looking individual. Do you think that is something where people want to have that gratitude of, I look good, therefore I feel good, versus I'm healthy and I'm fit, therefore I feel good?
Well, you mentioned the health industry. There's quite a bit of a disconnect between the health side and the fitness side when it comes to health and fitness. And I think both have kind of, like our political systems, have gone to these great extremes where, for health, we're, just get out and walk, and, it's much more focused as you look at like the ACSM guidelines or the American Heart Association guidelines. They're much more focused on just, I mean, again, it's moderate and vigorous activity, but there tends to be more of an overall emphasis in the health area. So just getting more physical activity, which is good for your health, but it's not going to improve performance. In order to really improve performance, you have to be pushing toward a more fitness side. But then on the fitness side, we tend to be doing everything purely for aesthetics as opposed to more just your overall health. And so the things that we tend to be doing in health clubs and personal training in those areas are not necessarily working what's best for somebody's health. It's, focused on getting those six pack abs and getting lean and all that kind of stuff. And it's not really having, is in my opinion, the best benefit for the overall wellness and performance of an individual.
Right. Well, what number 3 was essentially saying is it's great to exercise several times a week, but if you push yourself too hard for more than that 30-minute window, or sometimes twice a day, then you're putting yourself at risk. And they're just saying, hey, when you get over the age of 50, it's a lot harder for you to recover. So it's important to get that rest and recovery in to help with your joints and your ligaments and stuff like that.
Well, they're not talking about going over the 30 minutes there. They're talking about training frequency. So, they say it's great to exercise several times a week, but if you push every day and sometimes twice a day, you're pushing too much, which I think is a bit of bullshit. First of all, the more frequently we are doing cardio, the more benefit it's going to have. So frequency is not the issue. In fact, most people don't train frequently enough. I will make that argument till I'm blue in the face, is that training frequency is one of the most crucial myths that we have pushed on people when it comes to exercise science, that, you have to decrease the frequency of the training, or you have to have a certain, particularly when we talk about resistance training, you got to have the 24 to 48 hour rest in between, or was it 48 really to 72 hours in most cases? Yeah. There's a certain level of need you have to recover from the exercise, and it may take that long, but we don't need to train less frequently to accomplish better goals.
Right.
We need to manage the activities that we are doing and doing those activities with a greater frequency. And so, yeah, you're not going to go out and you're not going to do a true Tabata workout 7 days a week. You're going to tear your body up. But, do that a couple times a week, but then, add to that some low intensity, steady state type of exercise. If you're doing it for your health rather than performance, then, mix up running, biking, swimming, do a lot more activity and do it more times a week. I personally would prefer to train anywhere from probably 10 to 12 sessions per week and compartmentalize my exercise so that I'm doing resistance training separate from my cardio. And, when I do resistance training, I'm going to split things up a little bit more. I've started to favor a bit more of a push-pull type of focus so that I'm doing whole body exercise, which, some evidence is showing that it tends to favor muscle hypertrophy and conserving our muscle mass much more effectively than the traditional bro splits, upper body, lower body, or, arms, legs, back, chest. And in doing that, doing a push-pull where I'm doing both legs and upper body in a push-pull fashion, I am getting a little bit better stimulus every day, but the muscles are able to recover. I'm not doing so much work in a given workout that my body can't recover from that. I'm not doing 8 to 10 exercises in a workout. I'm doing like 3 exercises in a workout. And then, come back if I can, like in an afternoon workout, and do some cardio. It may just be low intensity walking the dogs, but I'm getting a little bit of that exercise, physical activity at least twice a day. But obviously we can do more than that. And even ACSM will talk about the benefit that you can get from even like 5, 10, 15-minute sessions frequently throughout the day. So it's not a matter of telling people to train less frequently, which in order to train less frequently, you got to increase the duration of the exercise, which means you're putting the body under greater repetitive stress that it can't recover from, and you're more likely to see injury without the added benefit of doing more overall volume of work over the course of the week that's going to have a greater stimulus on the cardiorespiratory system or the musculoskeletal system. So I think higher frequency but managed properly is a much better recommendation for individuals than telling them you're training too frequently.
I think
First of all, to just say you're training too frequently without assessing the actual individual is just stupid. You can't say somebody's training too frequently unless you actually know what they're doing in their workout.
That's a good segue for reason number 4, which is you're too often pushing yourself to exhaustion.
Okay, that I'll agree with. But I would also add that most people are not too often pushing themselves to exhaustion. You're dealing with a small percentage of the population that are pushing themselves to exhaustion. We know that less than 23% of the U.S. population even meets the physical activity guidelines, provided by ACSM and the American Heart Association. So if that few of the population is hitting that goal, what percentage of that is actually pushing themselves to exhaustion?
Few and far between.
Yeah. And, if you are not recovering from the exercise, then you need to manage that dose of exercise. And it's not by decreasing the frequency. It may actually be by increasing the frequency, but decreasing the duration, managing the intensity of that exercise in order to be able to recover from it and be able to adapt.
So speaking of recovery, number 5 is you're skipping warm-ups and cool downs.
I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
I'm kind of mixed on it. I mean, it's how you're defining the warm up and cool down. Obviously, you should not jump right into your training intensity. You need to build up to that over a course of time. So, for example, I keep bringing up the non-air quote Tabata. And so you're doing that. You're not going to do simply a 4-minute workout where you're just going to hop on a bike and go all out for the first 20 seconds, take a 10-second rest, and then repeat 8 times. You got to warm up a little bit. You're going to do maybe 5 minutes of just lighter pedaling on the bike, get your blood flowing, and then you kick into that. And then you'll do maybe another 5 minutes after. So that whole workout might be about a 15-minute workout, but you have that really hard, intense 4 minutes in there that's going to be the best stimulus for cardiovascular development.
Right.
So that's including a warm up and a cool down. But if somebody goes for a jog, do you need to spend 20 minutes stretching and foam rolling and doing all that kind of stuff prior to starting your run? Probably not. Just start out, maybe even like a slow walk, build that into a slow jog, and then get into your running pace. And then when you finish, that's when you should be stretching. You should be doing a little bit of walking afterwards, and any kind of exercise, a little bit of cool down afterwards is going to be important just to help get rid of the lactic acid. We know that if we are moving at an intensity of about 30 to 40% of your VO2 max post-exercise, that's the most optimal way to oxidize the lactic acid that's being produced and to remove it from the bloodstream so you're going to have less soreness.
In elementary school, we had a substitute PE teacher, and they told us something, and I always remember I will always remember it. They gave us a bunch of like rubber bands, and they had a bunch of rubber bands that they put into a refrigerator. And so the rubber bands were cold, and they gave us all those rubber bands, and they're like, try and pull it out. And we'd pull it, and those rubber bands would just snap. They were just brittle because they were cold. And then the substitute teacher was like, okay, now try these rubber bands, which it was summertime. So they were kind of sitting out in the sun a little bit. They were warm, and those rubber bands would stretch all the way out. And the substitute teacher looks at us and he goes, this is the importance of warming up before you work out. This is the importance of warming up before you do exercise. If you don't warm up your muscles, they'll snap just like these rubber bands. If you go into an exercise cold, your muscles you're at risk of hurting yourself just like these cold rubber bands are. And I don't know why that always stuck with me. I was probably like
but that's
7
also,
or 8.
That's also why so many people think they got to spend a significant amount of time stretching
You don't
prior
need
to
that.
workout. What that PE teacher should have taught you was that this is the importance of doing a dynamic warm up prior to doing any kind of work, because when the rubber band or the muscle, and we're talking more of the connective tissue, not the muscle, because the muscle we don't want to be overly stretched. It should be slightly stretched, but it's the connective tissue that we're really dealing with. And when the connective tissue is warmed up, it becomes more plastic, meaning that it'll stretch and it'll maintain that deformation. Whereas when it's cold, it acts more elastic, where it's going to recoil and stretch back. And if it's stretched too hard, it's going to snap. But what we don't tend to teach people is that too much of that stretching prior to any kind of activity is going to decrease the force output in the muscle.
Right.
Because we are not taking advantage of the stretch reflexes that the muscles can afford us. And so what we should talk about when we're talking about warming up is not a lot of stretching prior to, but doing a dynamic warm up, which progressively moves your body through a fuller range of motion in multiple different directions and joint angles prior to going into our more intensive exercise. And that doesn't take a whole heck of a lot. That could be a couple minutes of just, even in place, moving your joints through those ranges of motions, progressively getting a little bit larger range of motion as you go. And then stretch when you're done, because at that point now your muscles and your connective tissues are fully warmed up. They're going to elongate and maintain that deformation so that over time you are building up your flexibility more effectively.
So it's kind of instead of using a metaphor of rubber bands, we should use a metaphor, especially if we're going to be promoting a more dynamic style, not rubber bands, but silly putty, right? Because if you pull out silly putty and bring it back together, it stretches and it can keep that elasticity and just bounce. But if you pull silly putty and you stretch it out and you just maintain that stretch, then it kind of droops down and it's not as springy, it's not as durable. It just kind of,
Well, I mean, yeah, silly putty, where that is a good example is that as you stretch it when it's cold, it's going to break. It breaks very easily. Whereas if you stretch it when it's warm, it's going to stretch and it's going to maintain most of that deformation. It's not as elastic. Rubber band is pretty good for the elastic aspect of it, but it's really a matter of stretching it too hard, you're going to break it. So I would agree with the issue that you are skipping the warm up and cool downs, but let's keep the warm up and the cool down to a sensible level so that we're putting more effort into the actual training stimulus than we are into doing a lot of repetitive, unnecessary warm up, cool down type of activities. Like foam rolling, for example, is good. If you have a particularly tight area in your muscle, it's going to help relax that a little bit. It doesn't really get deep into the muscle the way a lot of people think it does, but it's also a very short-lived relaxation of those muscles. And so doing it just prior to, say, a lifting exercise where you're tight, it's going to have some benefit. But if you do spend 20 minutes doing foam rolling and then go and exercise, you've wasted probably about 18 minutes.
Number 6 is, and I feel like we're starting to get really repetitive here. You're always using the highest intensity.
Yeah. And again, what is the highest intensity? I mean, highest intensity cardio to me would be no longer cardio. We're talking sprinting. Or, I guess what they're really probably referring to is, doing more cardio that is in excess of probably maybe 80-85% of your VO2 max, all out kind of efforts. You're doing a lot of always doing high intensity interval training. I could agree with that, if you're doing too much of that. But you have to manage intensity in order to appropriately stimulate an adaptation. And so I guess I don't have an issue with, I don't like the heading or always using highest intensity. I would label this as you're not managing intensity effectively. And this is where, again, training frequency can be higher when we properly manage the intensity. You do a couple shorter high intensity bouts throughout the week. You're going to have some bouts that are going to be lower intensity, but much longer duration. You're going to have others that are going to be more moderate intensity that are a little bit more moderate in duration. The more you're varying up those aspects of the exercise, both the frequency, the intensity, and the nature of the exercise itself, maybe even the type of movement, the better off you're going to be and the less likely you are to have injuries coming from that. That makes any sense, I hope.
Yeah. I think we need to step up the intensity, especially if if you want to hit a goal, if you want to do something, don't just say, oh, well, I read this article and I'm aging and my body can't recover that much. So I'm not going to go as intense as I need to. I think there's a good, helpful balance that you need to just stay in.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, again, the key is individuality. Everybody is going to be a little bit different. What are our goals? Why are we training? How are we training? And if we're not managing that, then we're more likely to have injury. Some people need to train harder. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. I think I've said before, if you think you're doing cardio and you're carrying a hot cup of Starbucks coffee in your hand, you're not doing cardio. You're doing physical activity. But, I don't see a lot of people out exercising on the weekends that are, really just running hard in their running training. Most of them are kind of jogging. Most are walking. And so I don't think we're tending to train too hard. I think a lot more people can train a little bit harder, but there are probably a few instances where we could train a little bit less hard. And so you have to look at, what am I doing in my workout? What are my goals? Ask yourself always that why. Why am I doing this particular activity? And is it helping me to reach my goal?
Right.
And if you're not certain, reach out to an exercise professional. Because, us talking in this podcast, listening to this podcast, we're not addressing specific listeners. And it'd be great if you have specific questions regarding your exercise, then, we always have the link that you can connect to and ask us a question, and we can actually record that question and have it as a part of our podcast. And so if you have specific questions, feel free to ask us or ask somebody else who's a trusted professional.
Number 7, using bad technique. And I feel like if we were not talking about cardio, I think if we were actually talking about resistance training, this one should be number 1 if we were going that way. As far as number 7, as far as cardio goes, is it really like a huge thing of bad technique and form?
Oh, I would wholeheartedly agree with the fact that people are using bad techniques. It drives me crazy to drive around and see people out the way they run, and it's just like, oh my God, you're killing yourself. There are a lot of people who they kind of take that walking stride and try and make it a running stride. And if they simply walked at the pace that they're running, they would see fewer injuries. And so bad technique is not just in resistance training. It is kind of universal to exercise. But again, if you are feeling pain and you're having, they say that bad form can cause overuse injuries. Well, good form can cause overuse injuries as well. But if you are experiencing injury from your running, assess how you're running. Good,
So I
there are
want
a
to
lot of
know.
good shoe stores now that actually assess your running stride and your style and try and match you accordingly to good shoes. And I think that is a great option. Um, Videotape yourself running. If you have any background in some biomechanics, you can kind of see what you're doing wrong. If you don't, then have somebody knowledgeable assess what you're doing.
So you're talking about stride length when fatigue comes in, people instead of are putting their stride forward, their knees are swinging out wide, so they're putting themselves at risk of knee and hip injuries. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, I mean, it could be any of that. Yeah. I mean, it's a different individual. Some people, their technique is bad throughout their cardio.
Right.
Other people, it might just begin to set in as they become more fatigued. And if that's the case, then we have to kind of manage the duration of the exercise so we're not training under an excessive fatigue state and building up our capacity to be able to do that activity before we become fatigued.
So what would the ideal form and technique be for someone who's wanting to have a good cardio routine as a part of their workout program?
Well, I don't know how I can answer that on an audio podcast.
Opposite arm, opposite leg.
Well, I mean, that's the pretty obvious. I mean, opposite arm, opposite leg. I mean,
Right.
if you're running with your arms at your sides and not moving them, that's bad technique. But everybody's running style is going to be a little bit different. So it's really hard to sit here and say, this is the technique. I mean, it's the same with exercise. I mean, because our joints move and are in different fashions, we have different limb lengths. Everybody's going to have a slightly different technique. I have one of our wrestlers really working on trying to get him to be able to squat deeper. And he's working very hard at it, but he tends to be a very vertical back squatter, which means he can't get down near 90 degrees because his joints just aren't going to work that way. He's got extremely long shins. So his legs are so long that he just can't get down in that position with a more vertical position. And so we're really working on bar placement. He's got to be a low bar squatter if he's going to get deep enough. And so we move the bar down. I'm really focusing on, you got to get your forward lean. You got to lean more, push your butt back more as you're squatting. And he's getting better at it. And it just takes some practice, taking some technique without adding more weight to it while he just continues. I mean, because if he just continues to add weight to his squat and maintaining that form, he's going to injure himself. Mm. And he's probably one of those rare individuals that I say, you might benefit from putting your heels up on a plate or a board or something, because he's got good dorsiflexion in his ankles, but it's just because those legs are so long and his thighs are relatively short and he's got a pretty long back that he can't squat in a way that 98% of the other population is going to be able to squat. And so he's got to do the squat that's going to fit him most effectively. And it's the same with running. I mean, you can't tell people to position their feet in a certain way or any of that because their feet and their hips are all proportioned and shaped differently. But you can look at that technique and try and improve it in a way that is going to minimize any kind of injury. And so, if you have excessive hip rotation as you're walking, you got to modify your technique. It's only about 2 to 4 degrees on each side that your hips should be rotating. If you're not rotating enough, then you have kind of this weird stance. But it's hard to just simply list out a bunch of bullet points to say this is proper technique when you run. But you want to have adequate arm swing, kind of going that hip, pocket to socket type of instruction that we talked about. But again, if you're distance running, you're not necessarily pulling that hand all the way up, toward your eye. It's a much shorter range of motion, but there should be some swing in there. There should be enough arm swing that it's helping to drive the hips appropriately forward so that you can lengthen out your stride. You want to be landing more flat-footed as opposed on your heels or your toes. And, just run in a form that is comfortable and not causing you any undue stress on your body. And hit the weights so that your body is able to absorb those forces as you have foot strike, and you're going to have the proper posture as you run. Look at your shoes. What kind of shoes are you running in? Are you running in really old shoes, or are they kind of cheap, non-running shoes? One of the reasons I don't like running so much is because I can go through shoes pretty quickly, and they're not cheap anymore. It's not really a cheap form of exercise as it used to be, because shoes are going to cost you well over $100. And, if you're putting in about 500 miles a month or so, you're running through shoes pretty quickly. So I do like how they kind of end this article. It says, when in doubt, ask a coach to supervise your form so you can feel awesome for many years to come. Again, find a qualified coach, somebody who is familiar with running technique that can assess your running form and understands the diversity of biomechanics to be able to not make you run as they run, but to make you run what is effective for you to run. And so this whole list, I think, again, they arbitrarily picked 7 cardio habits. They arbitrarily picked cardio, and they arbitrarily picked the age of 50. I think, you can pick any number, and then, okay, what exercise are we talking about? If we took this to resistance training through the pain or injuries, you should train through the pain or the injuries, but not through an activity that is going to be causing that pain.
Right.
So find a movement that still maybe works the muscles without aggravating that pain. I've had a lot of shoulder issues because of the way my joints are structured. I have rarely missed exercise because of it. I just alter the exercise accordingly. Again, not adding low impact cardio. You could say, not modifying the intensity of your resistance exercise. Always going, high intensity, low reps. Conversely, we can also say that people doing resistance training are sometimes not adding a high intensity component to it. They're not lifting heavy enough. They're just doing light weights for high repetitions. You need to do a little bit of both. Training frequency works for all types of exercise. Train at an optimal frequency. Train as often as possible, but be able to adequately recover from the training that you're doing. Don't push yourself to exhaustion. Always kind of keep a little bit in the tank. Allow yourself to be able to recover from the exercise. Warm up appropriately. Cool your muscles down when you're done. Use, and again, an appropriate intensity. That was the one I think you said there was a little bit of redundancy in. And always, always use proper technique no matter what exercise you're doing. Any other things that you would add to that?
Mindset. Go in with a goal. Go in with a purpose. Go in knowing and understanding what it is that you are there to do.
Well, you have to have your why.
Yeah.
And, if you know what you're intending to do, then you can assess, is the activity that I'm doing moving me in that right direction, or is it working against me?
Right.
And, the key is keep moving, move more often, and don't let age be the limiting factor. It's, as it says here, it says cardiovascular training is one of the best things you can do as you age. It boosts your mobility and flexibility, improves your endurance, and helps you sleep better, according to WebMD, which, again, I love these articles that will, really kind of cite a secondary source. Why don't you go to the real actual research that's out there that says that it's beneficial?
According to Wikipedia.
Yeah. According to Eat This, Not That. But again, cardio isn't the most important type of training as we age. We want to maintain our cardiovascular health, but what's really going to boost your mobility and flexibility and possibly help you sleep better is doing a balanced exercise program that includes muscle strength, muscle endurance, flexibility training, and as well, I would say much of the neuromotor skill related type of training that we can be doing as well for balance, coordination, agility, and so on. Anything else to add?
No, I think you covered it.
All right. So don't buy into all of these insert numbers, insert age, insert activity articles, and age well.
Age well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.